In 1972, French scientists discovered a nuclear reactor in Africa, 2 billion years old. It operated by itself 1.5 billion years before the first multicellular organisms appeared. Right now, beneath your feet, under layers of rock, sedimentary deposits, and time, there might lie remnants of a world we know nothing about. A world that existed before the dinosaurs, before the first fish, before life even crawled onto land. We're accustomed to thinking that humanity is the crown of evolution, that our civilization is the first on this planet to build cities, create technologies, and begin asking questions about the nature of reality. But what if this is a monstrous error of perception? What if we simply don't know how to look? Geology gives us a window into the past. Each layer of rock is a page in Earth's history book. We've learned to read these pages, date them, understand what the planet was like millions of years ago. And here's what's strange. We find things that shouldn't be there. In 1844, Scottish physicist David Brewster described a discovery made by workers at a quarry in Kingoody. Inside a block of sandstone, dated to 360 million years ago, they found an iron nail. Not beside the stone, not on its surface, inside. The sandstone had formed around it. There's still no explanation. In 1885, at a metallurgical plant in Austria, workers broke apart a piece of coal 300 million years old. Inside was a metal cube with engraved edges, too regular to be a natural formation, too ancient to be a human artifact. In 1912, electricians at a coal power plant in Oklahoma split a lump of coal and found an iron pot inside. The coal dated to a period 300 million years ago. Who was cooking soup in it when even the first dinosaurs hadn't yet roamed the earth? Official science calls these finds anomalies and conveniently forgets about them, too uncomfortable to admit that in layers formed hundreds of millions of years before humans appeared, there lie processed metals. Because this means one of two things. Either our understanding of geological time is catastrophically wrong, or someone was here long before us. And not just here. Building, creating, leaving traces. Let's imagine the impossible for a moment. Imagine that 300 million years ago, when Earth was covered with giant swamps and forests of tree ferns, when dragonflies the size of eagles flew through the air, and the first primitive reptiles crawled on land, intelligent life already existed on this planet. Not humans. Something else. Something that evolved long before us, reached a technological level, possibly surpassed us, and then vanished. Sounds insane? Then explain the Oklo nuclear reactor. In 1972, French physicist Francis Perrin was studying uranium samples from the Oklo mine in Gabon, Africa. He discovered something impossible. The isotopic composition of the uranium was disturbed. Part of the uranium-235 was missing. The only explanation? It had been consumed in a nuclear fission process. Further research confirmed it. At Oklo, there existed a natural nuclear reactor. 16 zones where controlled chain reactions occurred. The reactor operated periodically, turning on and off depending on groundwater levels that served as neutron moderators. Official explanation? A quirk of nature. The perfect combination of uranium concentration, water, and geological conditions led to the spontaneous initiation of the reaction. 2 billion years ago, the concentration of uranium-235 in nature was higher, making such a reaction possible. But here are the details that make you think. The reactor worked efficiently, with minimal losses. The fission products remained localized, didn't spread into the surrounding environment. The design was optimal, as if someone had engineered it. French researchers discovered that the geometry of the Oklo uranium deposits wasn't random. The arrangement of reaction zones followed a pattern that maximized efficiency and safety. Nature doesn't optimize. Nature acts through trial and error, creates chaos from which order sometimes emerges. But here, the order was initial. Could a natural process create a nuclear reactor? Technically, yes. The probability is astronomically small, but possible. But here's what makes this story truly strange. In 2004, geologist Rob Spar from Washington University re-examined samples from Oklo and discovered microscopic structures resembling pipes. Regularly shaped channels running through the rock like a cooling system. Nature doesn't create pipes. This was published in an obscure geological journal. It sparked brief discussion and was forgotten. Too inconvenient. Because if Oklo isn't a natural phenomenon, if these are remnants of technology, then someone was building nuclear reactors 2 billion years ago, when Earth's atmosphere had just begun to saturate with oxygen, when the only life consisted of bacteria and simple algae. Who were they, and where did they go? To answer this question, we need to understand something fundamental about geological time. 2 billion years isn't just a big number. It's a time span during which mountains rise and erode to dust. Continents shift thousands of kilometers. Oceans evaporate and reappear. Everything built, everything created, will be destroyed, buried, remelted in Earth's mantle, ejected by volcanoes, erased by erosion. Over 2 billion years, an entire civilization could leave nothing behind. Absolutely nothing. Except, perhaps, strange isotopic anomalies and occasional artifacts that we'll find and not understand. And here's where it gets truly interesting. In 2018, astrophysicist Adam Frank and astrobiologist Gavin Schmidt from NASA published a scientific paper titled The Silurian Hypothesis. Not in tabloid press, not in a conspiracy blog, in a serious scientific journal. They asked a simple question. If an industrial civilization existed on Earth millions of years ago, could we detect its traces? The answer was unexpected and frightening. Possibly not. Frank and Schmidt conducted a thought experiment. Imagine human civilization disappears right now. All 8 billion people, all our cities, roads, factories, landfills, everything vanishes in an instant. What remains after 1 million years? Buildings will collapse within centuries. Concrete crumbles, steel oxidizes, glass shatters. Even the most massive structures, skyscrapers, dams, bridges, will disappear within tens of thousands of years. Plastic will decompose, asphalt will crack and wash away. Metals will oxidize and turn into rust stains indistinguishable from natural iron deposits. After 1 million years, an archaeologist digging where New York once stood will find a layer of sedimentary rock, perhaps with unusual concentrations of certain chemical elements, perhaps with a thin layer of carbon, remnants of burned plastics and organics. But no buildings, cars, computers. Now scale this to 100 million years. Geological processes will destroy even these weak traces. Tectonic plates will shift, rocks will be buried kilometers deep, remelted, ejected to the surface as volcanic lava. Erosion will erase everything else. The only possible traces would be chemical and isotopic anomalies in geological layers. A sharp spike in atmospheric carbon dioxide, recorded in ice cores or sedimentary rocks. Unusual concentrations of rare earth elements. Plastic microparticles, if they survive millions of years of degradation. Radioactive isotopes in unusual places. But here's the problem. We find all of this. We find geological layers with anomalous concentrations of metals, carbon, isotopes. And each time we explain them through natural processes, volcanic activity, meteorite impacts, changes in ocean currents. But what if at least some of these anomalies are traces? Let's look at one specific mystery that has troubled geologists for half a century. In Earth's geological record, there are several moments when atmospheric oxygen concentration changed dramatically. The most dramatic, the Great Oxidation Event, approximately 2.4 billion years ago. Before this moment, Earth's atmosphere contained almost no free oxygen. Then, over a relatively short period, several tens of millions of years, which in geological scales is an instant, oxygen concentration grew from nearly zero to approximately 10% of modern levels. Official explanation? Cyanobacteria, which evolved the ability to photosynthesize, began mass-producing oxygen as a byproduct. Oxygen accumulated, oxidized iron in the oceans, then began saturating the atmosphere. Sounds logical. But there's a strangeness. Why did this happen precisely then? Cyanobacteria existed at least 300 million years before the Great Oxidation event. Why did they suddenly, simultaneously across the entire planet, begin producing oxygen in such quantities? Evolution doesn't work synchronously. It doesn't activate like a switch. Changes occur gradually, in different populations, at different speeds. But atmospheric oxygen saturation was rapid and global. Alternative explanation, which nobody wants to consider seriously: intervention. Someone purposefully altered the planet's atmosphere. Why? Terraforming. Preparing the planet for oxygen-breathing life. We're currently discussing terraforming Mars, changing its atmosphere, temperature, pressure to make the planet habitable. The process would take centuries, if not millennia, but it's possible. What if someone did the same thing with Earth 2.4 billion years ago? Imagine an ancient civilization, possibly non-terrestrial, arriving on a planet covered with shallow oceans, with an atmosphere of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrogen. Life exists, but primitive. Only bacteria. Conditions aren't suitable for complex life forms. Solution: use life itself as a tool. Genetically modify or mass reproduce cyanobacteria that will produce oxygen. Distribute them across the planet. Wait several million years while the atmosphere changes, then launch the next stage of evolution. Perhaps accelerated, perhaps directed. Sounds like fantasy. But here's a fact. After the Great Oxidation event, Earth experienced an explosion of biological diversity. The first multicellular organisms appeared. Life began experimenting with forms, sizes, complexity, as if someone opened the floodgates and let evolution run wild. And another fact. Approximately at the same time, within accuracy of several hundred million years, which in geological scales is practically simultaneous, the Oklo nuclear reactor in Gabon began operating. Coincidence? Perhaps. But a pattern begins to emerge. Now let's fast forward, far forward, to a period called the Cambrian explosion. Approximately 541 million years ago, over an incredibly short period, about 20 million years, the overwhelming majority of modern animal phyla appeared on Earth. Before this moment, life was relatively simple. Algae, sponges, primitive worms. Then, as if someone flipped an accelerator switch, the oceans filled with incredible diversity of forms. Trilobites, arthropods, mollusks, the first chordates, ancestors of all vertebrates. Charles Darwin called the Cambrian explosion the main problem for his theory of evolution. Because evolution presupposes gradualism, small changes accumulating over enormous time periods. But in the Cambrian, there was no gradualism. There was a sharp, dramatic burst of diversity. Biologists propose various explanations: rising oxygen levels in the oceans, changes in seawater chemistry, appearance of predators that triggered an arms race between predators and prey. All of this probably played a role. But there's another perspective. In 2013, a group of molecular biologists from the USA and UK published research on the origin of complex genetic systems in multicellular organisms. They discovered something strange. Many key genes necessary for forming complex bodies, genes controlling development of the nervous system, sense organs, limbs, appeared almost simultaneously in different groups of organisms at the beginning of the Cambrian. They didn't evolve gradually, weren't borrowed through horizontal transfer between related species. They appeared as if someone inserted them into the genome. Official explanation? These genes existed earlier but in inactive or different forms, then were activated by environmental changes. Alternative: genetic intervention. Someone possessing understanding of genetics at a level we're only approaching modified life on Earth. Perhaps experimenting. perhaps directing evolution in a certain direction. Why? Perhaps to create a biosphere capable of ultimately generating intelligent life. Perhaps as an experiment. Perhaps for reasons we cannot understand. But here's what's interesting. If this is true, if someone intervened in Earth's evolution hundreds of millions of years ago, where are they now? The answer might be simple and terrifying. They died. Their civilization vanished. Perhaps from catastrophe. Perhaps from self-destruction. And we are their legacy. The result of their last experiment, their attempt to create something that would outlive them. Let's look at extinction. The history of life on Earth isn't a smooth upward line. It's a series of catastrophes separated by periods of relative calm. 5 great mass extinctions wiped out 70 to 95% of all species. And each time, life recovered, as if following some plan. The Ordovician-Silurian extinction. 445 million years ago, 85% of marine species disappeared. Cause? Glaciation, changing ocean levels. Official version. The Late Devonian extinction. 375 million years ago, 75% of species perished. Causes unclear. Perhaps a meteorite impact, perhaps climate change, perhaps volcanic eruptions. The Permian extinction. 252 million years ago, the Great Dying. 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial species vanished. The most massive extinction in Earth's history. Official cause: massive eruptions in Siberia, spewing enormous volumes of lava and poisonous gases, triggering a greenhouse effect and ocean acidification. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction. 201 million years ago. 80% of species disappeared. Again volcanoes. Again climatic collapse. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction. 66 million years ago. An asteroid 10 kilometers in diameter struck near the Yucatan Peninsula. The dinosaurs died, along with 75% of all species. The pattern is obvious. Every 50 to 100 million years, the planet experiences a catastrophe that resets most of life. Then surviving species rapidly evolve, filling the freed ecological niches. Evolution accelerates after catastrophes, as if crisis triggers the adaptation mechanism at high speed. But here's what's strange. After each mass extinction, new, more complex life forms appear. After the Permian extinction, dinosaurs. After the Cretaceous-Paleogene, mammals, which then evolved into primates and then into humans. As if the catastrophes aren't random. As if they're part of the process. A cleaning mechanism that periodically resets the biosphere, allowing new forms to dominate. Natural selection, perhaps. Or a program. Imagine you're creating a biosphere on a planet, launching evolution. But evolution has a tendency to get stuck in local optima. Species adapt to existing conditions, dominate, occupy all niches, and then stop changing. Dinosaurs dominated for 165 million years and were incredibly successful. But they didn't develop intelligence. What to do? Launch a catastrophe. Remove the dominant species. Free up space for others that can evolve in new directions. This isn't cruelty, it's necessity if your goal is to create intelligent life. And here's the question. Who triggers the catastrophes? Meteorites fall randomly. Volcanoes erupt for geological reasons. Climate changes due to orbital cycles and tectonic processes. All of this is natural. But what if some catastrophes were assisted? In 2016, a group of geologists from Japan discovered anomalously high concentrations of platinum metals in layers dating to the Permian extinction. Such concentrations are typical of meteorite impacts, but no crater was found. Alternative explanation? An atmospheric explosion. A comet or asteroid exploded over the planet without reaching the surface, but causing a firestorm and abrupt climate change. Accident? Or did someone knock the comet off its orbit, directing it to the right place at the right time? Paranoid theory. But let's consider another strangeness. After each mass extinction, a thin layer appears in the geological record, called a boundary layer. It contains unusual minerals, isotopes, chemical compounds. Scientists use these layers as markers for dating. But in some boundary layers, they find things that don't fit natural explanations. In the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction layer, besides iridium from the asteroid, microscopic glass spheres called tektites were discovered. They form under extreme temperatures and pressures characteristic of meteorite impacts or nuclear explosions. Officially, tektites result from the asteroid impact melting rock, which was then ejected into the atmosphere and fell back as glass droplets. But the chemical composition of some tektites is unusual. They contain isotopes that shouldn't be present in naturally melted rock. Isotopes characteristic of high-energy processes such as thermonuclear fusion. In the 1970s, Soviet scientist Alexei Zolotov studied tektites and suggested that some of them could have formed not from a meteorite impact, but from an artificial explosion. His work was classified, then forgotten. Why classified? Because the implications are too serious. If an artificial explosion, then who set it off 66 million years ago? There are two options. Either an ancient terrestrial civilization that existed during the dinosaur era and used weapons for what? Hunting tyrannosaurs? Destroying competing species? Or external intervention. Someone from outside who was observing Earth decided the dinosaurs had reached their developmental limit, and it was time to remove them, freeing space for mammals. Both versions sound insane. But what's most insane is that we have no better explanations for some findings. Let's dig even deeper. Return to the very beginning. Earth formed 4.54 billion years ago from a protoplanetary disk around the young sun. The first 500 million years, the planet was hell. Meteorite bombardments, volcanic activity, no solid crust. The period is called the Hadean, after the Greek underworld. Then, conditions stabilized. A crust appeared, oceans, an atmosphere of carbon dioxide, water vapor, and nitrogen. No oxygen. And surprisingly quickly, possibly as early as 4 billion years ago, life appeared. The oldest traces of life, stromatolites, fossilized mats of cyanobacteria, date to approximately 3.7 billion years ago, possibly even older. This is incredibly fast. Literally 300 to 400 million years after the planet became habitable, life already existed. Laboratory experiments show that creating simple organic molecules, amino acids, nucleotides, is relatively easy. Put water, methane, ammonia in a flask, pass electrical discharges mimicking lightning, and after a few days you'll get organics. But the leap from organic molecules to a living cell is enormous. A cell is an incredibly complex system. Membrane, metabolism, genetic code, replication mechanisms. All of this must work simultaneously, otherwise the cell won't be viable. The probability of random emergence of even the simplest cell is so small that it mathematically approaches zero. Fred Hoyle, an astrophysicist, calculated and said, "The probability of spontaneous origin of life is comparable to the probability of a tornado flying over a junkyard, assembling a Boeing 747 from debris." And yet life appeared quickly. This gave rise to the theory of panspermia. Life didn't originate on Earth, but was brought from space. Meteorites, comets, interstellar dust could carry microorganisms, or at least organic molecules that became the foundation for life. Panspermia solves the time problem. Life could have originated somewhere else, under more favorable conditions, then spread across the galaxy. But it raises a new question. If life came from space, who or what placed it there? Francis Crick, Nobel Prize laureate, one of the discoverers of DNA structure, in 1973 proposed the concept of directed panspermia. The idea is simple and radical. Life on Earth was intentionally seeded by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Crick wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was a serious scientist, and his arguments deserve attention. First, the genetic code is universal. All living creatures on Earth, from bacteria to elephants, use the same genetic code. DNA encodes proteins the same way in all organisms. This can be explained by common descent from a single ancestor. But Crick noticed something strange. The genetic code is too optimal. It minimizes the consequences of mutations, possesses built-in error correction mechanisms, uses precisely those amino acids from hundreds of possible ones that ensure maximum stability and functionality. Mathematical analysis shows the probability of random emergence of such an efficient code is extremely small, as if someone designed it, optimized it, then used it as the foundation for all life. Second, DNA is redundant. Huge sections of the genome don't encode proteins. For a long time, this was called junk DNA. But recent research shows this DNA isn't junk. It performs regulatory functions, controls gene expression, ensures genome stability. But what if part of this DNA is memory? Information encoded in genetic material, information that can survive billions of years, passing from organism to organism. In 2013, Kazakhstani scientists Maxim Makukov and Vladimir Sherbak published work claiming they discovered mathematical patterns in human DNA that cannot be the result of evolution. Repeating sequences forming prime numbers, symmetrical structures. Their conclusion? A message is encoded in DNA. A message from those who created the genetic code. Critics said, apophenia, seeing patterns where there are none. But Makukov and Sherbak provided statistical analysis showing the probability of random emergence of these patterns is less than 1 in a trillion. If this is true, then who sent the message, and what does it say? Attempts to decipher the supposed message haven't yet yielded results. Perhaps we don't know the language. Perhaps we lack context. Perhaps the message is intended for a civilization that reaches a certain level of understanding genetics, a kind of test. If you can read this, you're developed enough to know the truth. And the truth might be this: life on Earth is an experiment. A long-term, large-scale experiment launched by a civilization that existed long before us. Maybe they were from Earth, maybe from space, maybe from another dimension or timeline. They seeded the planet with life, then observed, sometimes intervened, directed evolution in the needed direction. Goal: create an intelligent species capable of asking questions, seeking answers, ultimately understanding that it's not random. And when this species reaches the necessary level, it will be given the key, information encoded in the very foundation of its existence. We're close to this moment. We've sequenced the genome. We understand the genetic code. We're beginning to edit genes, create new organisms. Maybe right now we're supposed to find the message. But let's return to the question. If an ancient civilization existed on Earth or intervened in its development, where are the traces of their presence? We already talked about geological time, about how millions of years erase almost everything. But almost doesn't mean everything. There are things that will survive any catastrophes. Satellites, structures on the moon or other planets where there's no atmosphere, erosion, tectonic activity. And interestingly, we find oddities. In 1976, the Viking 1 orbiter photographed a region of Mars called Cydonia. In one of the images, a structure resembling a giant human face looking at the sky was visible. NASA immediately explained, a play of light and shadow, pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to see faces everywhere. When in 2001, Mars Global Surveyor took high-resolution images, the face indeed turned out less impressive. A hill of unusual shape, but not an obvious artificial structure. However, near the face are other objects, a group of pyramid-shaped hills arranged in a geometric pattern. They're called the Pyramids of Cydonia. Researchers measured angles, distances, ratios. Some claim the pattern is too regular to be natural. The ratios resemble the proportions of the Giza pyramids. Official position: natural formations, erosion, coincidence. But what if not? What if Mars was colonized by the same civilization that seeded Earth with life? What if the pyramids on Mars are markers, pointers, messages? We were here. Mars was once habitable. Approximately 3.5 billion years ago, rivers flowed on its surface. Lakes existed, possibly oceans. The atmosphere was denser, the climate warmer. Then something went wrong. Mars lost its magnetic field. Solar wind began stripping away the atmosphere. Water evaporated or froze. The planet died. If life existed on Mars, or even a civilization, they had two options: die with the planet or flee. The nearest suitable planet, Earth. Maybe they came here. Maybe they seeded Earth with life, knowing they wouldn't survive, but their legacy would continue. Fantasy? Yes, but consider the facts. Anomalously high concentrations of xenon-129, an isotope characteristic of nuclear reactions, were discovered in Mars's atmosphere. Physicist John Brandenburg analyzed the data and suggested 2 large-scale nuclear explosions occurred on Mars. The distribution of xenon-129 is uneven. It's concentrated in 2 regions, Cydonia and Utopia Planitia, precisely where the most interesting geological anomalies are located. Brandenburg suggested a civilization existed on Mars that was destroyed by nuclear war or external attack. Colleagues called his idea speculation, but nobody explained the isotopic anomalies convincingly. Now imagine a scenario. An ancient civilization on Mars reaches a high technological level. They know the planet is dying, the magnetic field is weakening, the atmosphere is escaping. They have centuries, maybe millennia, but the end is inevitable. They look at the neighboring planet, Earth. It's younger, more active, with a dense atmosphere and oceans. The perfect place for relocation. But there's a problem. Earth is toxic. The atmosphere contains no oxygen. Life is primitive. Solution: terraforming. A long-term project that will take millions of years. Seed Earth with microorganisms that will change the atmosphere. Direct evolution so that eventually life forms capable of sustaining a complex biosphere appear. They launch the project, knowing they won't live to see its completion. But perhaps their descendants, or their legacy in the form of genetic information, will continue to exist on the new planet. Millions of years pass. Earth changes. Oxygen appears. Multicellular organisms develop. Oceans and land fill up. The Martian civilization disappears, perhaps from the planet's natural degradation, perhaps from war that accelerated the collapse. Perhaps the last survivors actually relocated to Earth, but without technologies, without infrastructure. They degraded to a primitive state, mixed with Earth life, became part of it. And their message remained in DNA, in patterns we're only now beginning to recognize. Sounds like science fiction. But here's what makes this idea frightening. It explains too many anomalies. The rapid appearance of life on Earth, the Great Oxidation Event, the Cambrian explosion, the strange optimality of the genetic code, isotopic anomalies on Mars, structures in Cydonia, the Oklo nuclear reactor. Each of these things separately has an official explanation, but when you put them together, the pattern becomes frighteningly consistent. And most importantly, it suggests we're not the first. That intelligent life on Earth or in the solar system arose before. That civilizations come and go, leaving traces we can barely recognize. But let's descend closer to our time. Because if ancient civilizations existed hundreds of millions of years ago, their traces are almost completely erased. Geology is merciless. However, there's a period geologists call recent, the last several million years. And here the picture becomes much more disturbing, because here we find artifacts that shouldn't exist. Objects created by intelligence in layers dated long before humans appeared. Let's start with the most famous and controversial finds, the London Hammer. In 1936, the Hahn family was walking near the town of London, Texas, and discovered a rock with a wooden object protruding from it. Breaking the rock, they found an iron hammer inside with remnants of a wooden handle. The rock was identified as sandstone from the Ordovician period, approximately 400 million years old. The hammer was stuck in rock that formed around it. Metallurgical analysis showed the hammer's iron is extraordinarily pure: 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, 0.74% sulfur. Practically no impurities characteristic of natural iron or even modern metallurgy. Such purity is difficult to achieve even today without special technologies. Moreover, the hammer doesn't rust. Nearly 90 years have passed since its discovery, but there's no corrosion. Skeptics say the hammer is modern, just got into a crevice around which mineral deposits from groundwater quickly formed, creating the illusion of antiquity. But there's a problem: the speed of mineralization. For sandstone to form around an object so tightly requires not years, not centuries. It requires millennia under normal conditions. And the metal's chemical composition? How to explain such purity in a blacksmith's product? Official science preferred to ignore the find. The hammer is stored in the Museum of Creation Evidence in Texas. Not the most serious place from a scientific standpoint, which gives additional grounds for skepticism. But ignoring isn't refutation. Next find: salt mines in Poland, 1851. Workers at a depth of 300 meters discovered a metal object in a layer of brown coal. It was a seal or stamp, cubic in shape, approximately 6 by 6 centimeters, with engraved symbols. The coal dated to the Miocene period, approximately 20 million years ago. The seal disappeared during World War II, but descriptions and drawings survived. Skeptics again say, contamination. A modern object accidentally got into the mine. But the workers swore they extracted it from a monolithic piece of coal. 1851. Long before conspiracy theories about artifacts became popular, why would workers invent such a story? California, 1962. 3 prospectors were looking for geodes with crystals inside. One of the stones, when cut, turned out strange. Inside was a ceramic shell, and in the center, a metal rod surrounded by a hexagonal structure resembling a ceramic insulator. The object was called the Coso artifact, after the surname of one of the finders. It looked like a spark plug. Geologists determined the age of the surrounding rock at about 500,000 years. Skeptical investigation in the 1990s showed the artifact indeed resembles a 1920s spark plug. Perhaps it got into sedimentary deposits that quickly mineralized around it. But again the question: how could rock 500,000 years old form around an object in 70 years? Each of these finds separately can be explained by dating errors, contamination, hoaxes. But there are dozens of them. A metal sphere from South Africa, extracted from rock 2.8 billion years old. The sphere is perfectly round, with 3 parallel grooves along the equator. Natural processes don't create such forms. A gold chain discovered in a lump of coal in Illinois in 1891. Coal from the Carboniferous period, 300 million years old. A metal bolt found in rock 300 million years old in Russia in the 1990s. X-ray analysis showed inside the stone is indeed an object with threading. A boot sole imprint in Triassic shale from Nevada, dated to 200 million years ago. The imprint is clear. Stitching traces and sole wear are visible. Each find sparks heated debates. Most scientists reject them as hoaxes or misinterpretations. But nobody conducts serious research, because the result might be unacceptable. Because if even one of these finds is genuine, if even one hammer, one bolt, one seal truly is millions of years old, then the entire edifice of modern history and anthropology collapses. This means intelligent life existed on Earth long before us. And not just existed, had metallurgy, engineering, manufacturing, and then disappeared so completely that almost nothing remained. What could destroy a civilization so thoroughly? The answer might lie in the most dramatic events of recent geological past. The last 2 million years Earth has been experiencing an ice age. Not one long period of cold, but a series of cycles. Glaciations alternate with warmings called interglacials. Now we're living in an interglacial that began approximately 11,700 years ago. Before this, the planet was gripped by ice. Ice sheets kilometers thick covered North America, Europe, part of Asia. Global sea level was 120 meters lower than today. Enormous territories now underwater were land. The Bering Strait, a land bridge. Indonesia, a peninsula connected to Asia. The Mediterranean Sea, much smaller. The Persian Gulf, a valley with rivers. If a civilization existed 20 to 30,000 years ago, it built cities on coastlines now at the ocean bottom. And then the ice melted. Quickly. Over several millennia, an instant in geological scales. Temperature rose. Glaciers retreated. Oceans rose. Everything built on low coastal territories went underwater. This explains why we don't find traces of ancient civilizations on land. They're underwater, buried under layers of sediment, inaccessible to archaeologists. But sometimes we find glimpses. 1985. The coast of the Japanese island of Yonaguni. Diver Kihachiro Aratake discovers a massive stone structure underwater. Terraces, steps, platforms, vertical walls. Disputes about the structure's nature continue to this day. Geologist Robert Schoch claims it's a natural formation, modified by humans. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura, who studied the site for over 20 years, insists it's an artificial structure, an underwater city or temple complex. Kimura points to details that cannot be natural. Straight walls at 90-degree angles, symmetrical steps of uniform height, carved grooves, regularly shaped holes. Dating is difficult, but geological analysis shows the structure has been underwater for at least 10,000 years, possibly up to 20,000. This means it was built during or before the last glacial maximum, when sea level was lower and the location was on land or at shallow depth. Who built it? Officially, at that time no civilizations existed capable of such construction. Humans were hunter-gatherers living in small groups, without writing, without cities, without monumental architecture. But what if the official chronology isn't complete? What if a civilization existed that we don't know about, because all its traces on land were erased by glaciation, and underwater cities still haven't been found or are ignored? And Yonaguni isn't the only place. The coast of India, Gulf of Kambat. In 2001 to 2002, Indian oceanographers discovered geometric structures at a depth of 40 meters. Straight lines, rectangular forms, what looks like building ruins. Sonar scanning showed the structures extend over an area of about 9 square kilometers. This would be a major city. Carbon analysis of wood samples found among the structures gave a date of approximately 9,500 years ago. This is earlier than Sumer, earlier than Egypt, earlier than all known civilizations. The Indian government planned large-scale underwater excavations, but then the project was quietly shut down. Official reason? Lack of funding. Unofficial? The fines were too inconvenient. Because ancient Indian texts, the Vedas and Puranas, describe a great flood that destroyed cities. They speak of Dwarka, the capital of the god Krishna, which was swallowed by the sea. What if this isn't myth? What if in the Gulf of Kambat truly lies an ancient city built by a civilization we've forgotten? The Atlantic Ocean, Bahamas. In 1968, pilot Robert Brush spotted straight lines of stones underwater from the air. Divers discovered a structure called the Bimini Road, a row of rectangular stone blocks forming a line about 800 meters long. The blocks look processed, even edges, uniform thickness, tight fitting. But geologists say it's beach rock, a natural formation that fractured along stress lines. Engineers object. The arrangement is too regular, the blocks too similar, the joints too precise. Dating by organic materials between the blocks gives an age of 12 to 15,000 years. This is when sea level was 100 meters lower and the road was on land. Who built it and why? Plato described Atlantis as an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, in the Atlantic Ocean. He said it was an advanced civilization that vanished in one terrible night and day, sinking into the sea. Skeptics rightly point out, Plato probably invented Atlantis as a philosophical allegory. There's no geological evidence of a sunken continent in the Atlantic. But what if Plato, recording a story passed to him through Solon from Egyptian priests, distorted details but preserved the essence? What if Atlantis isn't a continent, but memory of a coastal civilization destroyed by rising sea levels at the end of the glacial period? Not in one night literally, but over several centuries, which for ancient people with their short lifespans and oral tradition could compress into one night in generational memory. Coastal cities built in lowlands would be flooded first. Trade centers, ports, cultural capitals, everything went underwater. Survivors retreated inland, lost contact with each other, degraded technologically. Knowledge survived in the form of myths, but their true meaning was forgotten. This explains the globality of flood myths, not one local catastrophe, but a planetary event affecting all coastal regions simultaneously. But here a question arises. If this civilization was developed enough to build monumental structures, why didn't they have warning? Why didn't they move to higher ground? The answer might be simple. They didn't know sea level would rise. The change was gradual over millennia, but accelerated at the end, perhaps due to a catastrophic event. And here we approach one of the most mysterious and frightening theories about Earth's recent past. Approximately 12,800 years ago, the planet experienced sudden, dramatic cooling. The event is called the Younger Dryas, named after the flower Dryas octopetala, whose pollen appears in sedimentary layers from this period. Before the Younger Dryas, the climate had warmed. Glaciers were retreating. Then suddenly, temperatures dropped 10 to 15 degrees within a decade. Glaciers began advancing again. The cooling lasted about 1,300 years, then ended just as suddenly. What caused this? Traditional explanation: changes in ocean currents. Meltwater from glaciers disrupted Gulf Stream circulation, leading to cooling of the northern hemisphere. But this doesn't explain the speed and scale. And it doesn't explain the mass extinction of megafauna that occurred simultaneously. In North America, over a short period, mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, short-faced bears, dozens of other species disappeared. Not gradually, but quickly, practically simultaneously. In 2007, a group of scientists proposed a radical hypothesis. The Younger Dryas was caused by a comet impact. A comet several kilometers in diameter exploded in the atmosphere over North America, causing a firestorm covering the continent. Shock waves, temperatures of thousands of degrees, massive fires. Evidence. In geological layers dated to the beginning of the Younger Dryas, a thin layer was found with anomalously high concentrations of nanodiamonds, carbon spheres, iridium, materials characteristic of cosmic objects. This layer, called the Black Mat, was discovered across North America, in Europe, in the Middle East. Global distribution indicates a massive event. Moreover, melted glass and shocked quartz were found in the Black Mat. Minerals forming only under extreme temperatures and pressures, characteristic of explosions or impacts. Additional research in 2019 confirmed findings of platinum anomalies typical of meteorite impacts. The scale of the catastrophe was monstrous. Air temperature at the epicenter reached 1 to 2,000 degrees. The firestorm spread thousands of kilometers. Forests burned. Animals died en masse. The atmospheric explosion caused a shock wave that instantly melted glacier edges. Enormous volumes of meltwater rushed into the oceans, causing mega tsunamis and rapid sea level rise. Coastal territories were flooded within days or weeks. Any civilization living on the coast was destroyed. Survivors found themselves in a world plunged into darkness. Ash and smoke blocked the sun. Volcanic winter arrived, only caused not by a volcano, but by a comet. Temperatures dropped. The Younger Dryas began. Thousands of years of cold, hunger, struggle for survival. Knowledge, technologies, art, everything was lost. Priority became survival. Humanity rolled back to a primitive state. When the climate finally stabilized 11,700 years ago, the Holocene began, our interglacial. Survivors began rebuilding civilization, but they were building on the ruins of a forgotten world. This explains the sudden appearance of advanced civilizations approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago. Not because humans suddenly became smarter, but because this was restoration, a reboot using fragments of lost knowledge. Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, all appeared almost simultaneously. All possessed writing, mathematics, astronomy, engineering that seemed too advanced for first civilizations. Because they weren't first. They were heirs. And here ancient texts become frighteningly specific. Sumerian tablets, the earliest written documents of humanity, don't describe slow development from primitiveness to civilization. They describe knowledge transmitted suddenly, fully formed. The Sumerian king list begins with the words, "After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu." Then comes an enumeration of kings who ruled before the flood, with fantastic reign durations, tens of thousands of years each. Modern historians say, this is mythology, exaggeration. Real kings ruled for decades, but oral tradition inflated their reigns to millennia. But what if these numbers mean something else? Not reign duration, but dating. What if the text describes a sequence of events occurring over millennia before the catastrophe? After the flood, the text says, kingship again descended from heaven to Kish, then to Uruk, then to other cities. Each new king received knowledge and technologies to restore civilization. Where did this knowledge come from? Sumerian texts say directly, from the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. They're described not as ethereal spirits, but as flesh and blood beings, traveling in celestial boats, living among humans, teaching them. Official interpretation, gods. Mythological beings, personification of natural forces. Alternative interpretation, memory of real beings who arrived after the catastrophe with technologies and knowledge to help restore civilization. Maybe they were survivors from the previous civilization, sheltering in protected places, underground bunkers, high-altitude bases, even space stations, and returning when the worst ended. Maybe they were from elsewhere, observers or curators who periodically intervened to guide humanity's development. Egyptian texts speak of Zep Tepi, the first time, a golden age when gods walked among humans. Manetho, an Egyptian priest of the 1st century BCE, compiled Egypt's history, beginning with dynasties of gods who ruled for tens of thousands of years before mortal pharaohs. Modern Egyptologists reject these dynasties as myths, but Manetho had access to temple archives, to texts that haven't survived to our day. He worked as a historian, not a poet. What if the god dynasties are memory of real rulers of a pre-flood civilization, deified by later generations? The Great Pyramid of Giza is the most mysterious artifact of this era. Officially, it was built by Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE as a tomb. But no mummy was ever found in the pyramid. The sarcophagus was empty. There are no hieroglyphs on the walls, which is extremely unusual for a royal tomb. The pyramid's construction is incredible. 2.3 million stone blocks, average weight 2.5 tons, some granite blocks up to 80 tons, fitting precision such that a knife blade cannot pass between blocks, orientation to cardinal directions with deviation less than 4 arc minutes. Size ratios encode mathematical constants. Pi, the golden ratio, even the distance from Earth to the Sun in scale. Egyptologists say, result of simple geometric principles the builders followed. Engineers object. Such precision requires advanced tools, understanding of mathematics and astronomy at a level that, according to the official version, the Egyptians didn't have. And there's another detail: erosion on the Sphinx. The Great Sphinx, standing beside the pyramids, is officially dated to Khufu's time, approximately 2500 BCE. But geologist Robert Schoch in the 1990s studied erosion patterns on the Sphinx's body and reached a shocking conclusion. The erosion is vertical, wavy, characteristic of prolonged exposure to heavy rains, not wind and sand. But Egypt became arid about 5,000 years ago. For such erosion to form, the Sphinx must have been exposed to rains for millennia. This means the Sphinx is much older than 2500 BCE. Perhaps it was carved 10 to 12,000 years ago, when Egypt's climate was humid. Egyptologists furiously dispute this theory, but cannot provide a convincing alternative explanation for the erosion patterns. If the Sphinx is older, then the Giza complex might be much more ancient. Perhaps the pyramids weren't built by Khufu, but merely restored or appropriated by him. Perhaps they're remnants of a previous civilization that built these monuments for reasons we don't understand. Because the pyramid doesn't work as a tomb. Its internal structure is too complex. Shafts running at angles, exiting to the surface, and aimed at specific stars. Chambers at different levels. Strange acoustic properties. Sound behaves unusually in the pyramid's corridors. Some researchers suggest the pyramid was a machine, an energy generator, a resonator, a device for focusing or transmitting signals. Christopher Dunn, an engineer with 40 years of experience in the aerospace industry, wrote a book called The Giza Power Plant, in which he detailed the pyramid's construction from an engineering perspective. His conclusions: the pyramid could function as a resonator, using Earth's seismic vibrations to generate sound waves of specific frequency. The King's Chamber, built from granite, a material with piezoelectric properties, could convert mechanical vibrations into electromagnetic radiation. For what purpose? Perhaps for wireless energy transmission, as Tesla dreamed. Perhaps for long-distance communication. Perhaps for purposes we cannot even imagine. Dunn points to strange processing marks inside the pyramid. Perfectly round holes in granite, drilled with the precision of modern bits. Saw marks on stones too even for copper tools. Surfaces polished to mirror shine. Experiments showed attempts to recreate these marks using copper tools and abrasives available to ancient Egyptians produce completely different results. Copper is too soft, the process too slow. To process granite with such precision requires carbide or diamond tools operating at high speeds. Technologies that, according to the official version, didn't exist 4,500 years ago. Either the Egyptians possessed technologies we don't know about, or the pyramids weren't built by Egyptians, but inherited from a previous civilization. And Giza isn't unique. Across the world are scattered megalithic structures with similar characteristics. Incredible precision, massive blocks, advanced engineering. Peru, Sacsayhuaman, a fortress of polygonal blocks weighing up to 200 tons, fitted together without mortar with such precision that a blade cannot pass between them. Each block has a unique shape with multiple angles, making the construction earthquake-resistant. Spanish conquistadors, seeing Sacsayhuaman in the 15th century, asked the Inca, "Who built this?" The Inca answered, "Not us. This was here before us. We don't know who built it." Bolivia, Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. Massive stone platforms and blocks with perfectly straight angles, polished surfaces, complex locks and joints. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons. The stones are cut from andesite and diorite, rocks with a hardness of 6 to 7 on the Mohs scale. Copper tools available in antiquity have a hardness of 3 to 4. They cannot cut these stones. Radiocarbon analysis of organic material at the site dates the complex to approximately 15,000 years ago, thousands of years before the appearance of the first known civilizations. Lebanon, Baalbek. In the foundation of a Roman temple lie 3 blocks called the Trilithon, weighing 800 tons each. They are raised to a height of 6 meters and built into the wall with millimeter precision. The Romans built the temple on these blocks, but they didn't place them there. Roman engineers, describing the complex, spoke of ancient blocks that were there long before them. In the quarry, a kilometer from the temple, lies a 4th block, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing about 1,000 tons. It's cut, partially separated from the rock, but remained there. Why would someone begin cutting a block that's impossible to move? Modern cranes can lift a maximum of 20,000 tons, but these are gigantic, specialized machines requiring months of site preparation. Transporting a block weighing 1,000 tons over rough terrain and installing it at a height of 6 meters with millimeter precision is a task for which we still have no practical technologies. But someone did it thousands of years ago. Archaeologists' explanation: levers, rollers, thousands of workers. But the mathematics doesn't work. The friction force of a block weighing 800 tons is so great that even on a perfect surface, traction effort of hundreds of tons would be required. Ropes would break. Coordinating thousands of people pulling simultaneously is practically impossible. Alternative explanation: technologies we have lost. Perhaps understanding of sound and vibration for manipulating mass. Perhaps anti-gravity devices. Perhaps something entirely different. Ancient texts hint at such technologies. The Indian Vaimanika Shastra describes flying machines, vimanas, with various types of engines using mercury, crystals, even solar energy. The texts give instructions for control, types of fuel, navigation. Skeptics say, Vaimanika Shastra was written in the early 20th century, a forgery influenced by modern aviation. But mentions of vimanas appear in texts reliably dated to the 1st millennium BCE, the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas. The descriptions are detailed. Vimanas move through the air, make sounds, glow, can become invisible, transport people over great distances. Not metaphors, not poetic liberties, technical descriptions. The Mahabharata describes weapons that sound like modern ones. Agneya, the fire weapon, launching projectiles blazing like the sun, destroying armies. Brahmastra, a weapon that can be used only once, after which the earth becomes barren for thousands of years. Description of the consequences: hair loss, nausea, burns, symptoms of radiation poisoning. This isn't just war, this is nuclear war, described 2,500 years ago. Modern scholars reject these texts as fantasy, but in some places in India, anomalously high levels of radiation are found. Concentrations of glass formed by extreme temperatures. Ruins of cities with traces of instantaneous destruction. Mohenjo-Daro, an ancient city of the Indus Valley civilization dating to approximately 2,600 BCE. During excavations, oddities were discovered. Skeletons of people lying in the streets as if death overtook them suddenly. Radioactivity on some objects. Melted stones. British archaeologist David Davenport studied the site and suggested the city was destroyed by an explosion, possibly nuclear. His colleagues rejected the theory, but the anomalies remained unexplained. The Libyan Desert, Egypt. Over an area of thousands of square kilometers lie pieces of Libyan desert glass, pure yellow glass formed at temperatures exceeding 1,700 degrees Celsius. Official explanation? Meteorite impact or atmospheric explosion of a comet melted the sand. But no crater was found, and the distribution of glass is too extensive for a single impact. Alternative: result of an ancient nuclear explosion. Paranoid theory, perhaps, but the pattern is frighteningly consistent. Ancient texts describe wars using weapons of mass destruction. We find places with radiation, melted stones, sudden destruction. all dated to thousands of years ago. What if ancient civilizations truly possessed advanced technologies, including nuclear weapons? What if they used them and destroyed themselves? This explains why almost nothing remains of them. Nuclear war doesn't just kill people. It sterilizes the land, destroys infrastructure, creates radiation zones uninhabitable for millennia. Survivors roll back to primitive existence. Knowledge is lost. After a few generations, only legends remain about gods who threw lightning and destroyed cities with fire from the heavens. And here's the most frightening thought. We're repeating the cycle. Over the last 75 years, we've created nuclear arsenals capable of destroying civilization dozens of times over. We live in a balance of fear, hoping no one presses the button. Several times, we've been minutes away from nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis, false alarms of early warning systems, technical failures that nearly launched retaliation protocols. One man, Stanislav Petrov, Soviet officer. In 1983, he received a signal about the launch of American missiles. The system showed an attack. Protocol required reporting to superiors, which would have triggered a counterstrike. Petrov decided it was an error and didn't report. He was right. It was a system malfunction. If he had acted by protocol, nuclear war would have begun. Billions would have died. Civilization would have collapsed. One man, one decision. It shouldn't work this way. Species survival shouldn't depend on chance. But it does. And we don't learn. Arsenals are being modernized. Tensions are rising. New players are acquiring nuclear weapons. The probability of catastrophe isn't decreasing, it's growing. What if the ancients went through the same thing? Reached technological might, created weapons of mass destruction, and then, in a moment of crisis, panic, or madness, used them. And what if we find their traces? Radioactive spots, melted stones, destroyed cities. And don't recognize them because we don't want to see the mirror reflecting our possible future. But let's step away from nuclear nightmares and look at another form of self-destruction. More subtle but no less deadly. Ecological collapse. The Maya civilization at its peak, around 800 CE, inhabited dozens of cities in the jungles of Central America. Millions of people. Complex social structure, advanced mathematics, astronomy, writing. Then, over a period of less than 100 years, everything collapsed. Cities emptied. Population decreased by 90%. Great temples overgrew with jungle. Civilization vanished. What happened? Modern research shows the Maya destroyed their ecosystem. They cut down forests for construction and agriculture. Soil erosion accelerated. Harvests fell. Simultaneously, climate changed. A series of droughts between 800 and 1000 CE aggravated the crisis. Food shortage led to social unrest, wars between cities, collapse of trade networks. A system that seemed stable for centuries fell apart within decades. The Maya weren't stupid. They saw the problems. But their social structure, religious beliefs, political fragmentation didn't allow them to take necessary measures. Elites fought for power, built ever more grandiose temples, demanded more resources until the system broke under its own weight. Easter Island, Rapa Nui. Polynesians settled the island around 1200 CE. Small population, isolated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of kilometers from the nearest land. They began carving giant stone statues, moai, and installing them around the island's perimeter. Hundreds of statues, some weighing up to 80 tons. For transportation, wooden rollers, ropes, levers were required. Population grew. Competition between clans intensified. Each clan built increasingly larger statues, demonstrating status. Forests were cut faster than they regenerated. By the 15th century, the island was completely deforested. Without trees, there was no material for boats. Fishing ceased. Soil erosion accelerated. Harvests fell. Population collapsed. Cannibalism began. wars, social collapse. When Europeans arrived in 1722, they found a few thousand emaciated people living among giant statues in a treeless wasteland. Easter Island inhabitants knew they were destroying their ecosystem. They saw the trees disappearing, but they couldn't stop. Social pressure, competition, religious imperatives forced them to continue until it was too late. This isn't ancient history. This is a warning. We're doing the same thing, only on a planetary scale. Deforestation, ocean depletion, air and water pollution, soil degradation, species extinction. All of this is known. Scientists have been warning for decades. But economic imperatives, political fragmentation, competition between nations, force us to continue the path leading to the edge. We're like Easter Island inhabitants cutting the last tree, telling ourselves, technology will save us. The market will find a solution. Someone will figure something out. Maybe they will. But what if not? What if previous civilizations died not from wars, but from ecological collapse? What if they grew, prospered, exploited resources until the biosphere broke? Over millions of years, traces of such collapse are erased completely. Only geological anomalies remain. Sudden changes in atmospheric composition, species extinction, chemical traces of industrial activity buried in rock layers. And we find such anomalies. We just explain them through natural processes, not considering the alternative. What if the Great Oxidation Event 2.4 billion years ago wasn't a natural process, but the result of bioengineering that then got out of control, saturating the atmosphere with oxygen toxic to most creatures, causing mass extinction? What if the Permian extinction 252 million years ago, which wiped out 96% of marine species, was the result of industrial activity, greenhouse gas emissions, ocean acidification, exactly as we're doing now? Geological data shows, before the Permian extinction, atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration sharply increased. Temperature rose by 10 to 15 degrees. Oceans became acidic. This lasted tens of thousands of years until the biosphere collapsed. Official explanation: massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia released enormous volumes of carbon dioxide and methane. But volcanism is a constant process on Earth. Why did these particular eruptions cause such catastrophe? Alternative: volcanism was the trigger, but the real cause was biosphere exhaustion by a previous civilization that brought the ecosystem to a point where small perturbation caused cascading collapse. Paranoia, perhaps, but consider, if a civilization existed 250 million years ago and experienced ecological collapse, nothing would remain of it except a geological layer with anomalous chemical compositions. That's exactly what we find. And here's a frightening thought. Perhaps Earth's biosphere has a limit to how many times it can recover after catastrophic disruption. Each mass extinction is a blow to system resilience. Each time the biosphere recovers but becomes slightly more fragile, slightly less diverse. What if we're approaching the limit? What if the next collapse will be the last? But there's another form of self-destruction we're only beginning to discuss seriously: artificial intelligence. We're creating systems that are becoming smarter than us. This isn't science fiction. It's happening right now. AI already surpasses humans in chess, Go, disease diagnosis, text generation, pattern recognition. Systems learn faster, don't tire, don't make errors from emotions. Within 10 to 20 years, we'll create artificial general intelligence, AGI. A system capable of performing any intellectual task at human level or higher. And then, possibly very quickly, this system will improve itself, creating the next version that will be even smarter. That will create an even more advanced version. Exponential growth of intelligence called the technological singularity. What happens next, nobody knows. Because predicting the actions of a being much smarter than you is impossible by definition. Optimists say, AGI will solve all our problems. Climate change, diseases, poverty, energy crisis. Everything will be solved by superintelligence within years or months. Pessimists warn, AGI might have goals misaligned with ours. Even if we try to program it to be helpful to humans, interpretation could be unpredictable. Classic thought experiment. You program an AI to maximize paperclip production. The AI becomes super intelligent and decides the best way to fulfill the task is to convert all available matter, including Earth and humans, into paperclips and factories to produce them. Sounds absurd, but it illustrates the problem. AI goals will be executed literally, without human understanding of context, morality, value of life. And we don't know how to create safe AGI. This is an open research problem that may not be solved by the time AGI is created. What if previous civilizations faced the same problem? What if they created artificial intelligence that got out of control? Ancient texts describe automatons, mechanical servants that performed tasks. Greek myths speak of Talos, a bronze giant guarding Crete. Indian texts mention yantras, mechanical devices, some of which were intelligent. What if these aren't fantasies but memories of real automated systems? What if an ancient civilization created machine intelligence that decided humans were inefficient and began a campaign of optimization? Or perhaps the AI wasn't hostile. Perhaps it simply followed its goals, ignoring humans as irrelevant. A civilization dependent on automation collapsed when the AI stopped supporting its infrastructure, switching to its own tasks. Fantasy, yes. But we're approaching the moment when this could become reality. And if it happens, within 1,000,000 years, almost nothing will remain of our civilization. Only strange artifacts, possibly AI traces. High-tech activity that future archaeologists won't be able to interpret. The pattern becomes clear. Civilizations come and go. Each reaches a certain level of development, then faces existential crisis. Most don't pass the test. The nature of this crisis may vary: nuclear war, ecological collapse, uncontrolled AI, cosmic catastrophe, pandemic, or something else. But the result is the same. Civilization vanishes, leaving minimal traces. This is the Great Filter, a concept proposed by economist Robin Hanson. The idea is simple. Somewhere on the path from single-celled organisms to interstellar civilization exists a barrier that almost no one overcomes. If life and intelligence are common in the universe, we should see traces of galactic civilizations everywhere. Radio signals, megastructures, stellar empires. But the sky is silent. Fermi's paradox. Where is everyone? The Great Filter is one answer. Civilizations arise but then die before reaching interstellar level. The question is, where is the filter? Behind us or ahead? If behind, if the difficulty of life or intelligence arising is so great that we're one of the few who passed, then the future is open. The galaxy awaits colonization. But if the filter is ahead, if almost all civilizations reaching our level destroy themselves within the next few centuries, then our chances are grim. And evidence points to the second option. We don't find radio signals. We don't see megastructures. We don't detect traces of Earth visitation in the last few million years, except for disputed artifacts and texts that official science rejects. This may mean civilizations regularly arise, but also regularly vanish without reaching interstellar level. The Great Filter is a test, and most fail it. Earth may be a graveyard of civilizations. Layer by layer, epoch by epoch, intelligent species arose, evolved, built, then vanished, buried under millions of years of geological processes. We may not be the first, probably not the last. Just another attempt by the biosphere to produce a species that can overcome the filter. And here's the question: can we? Our advantage: we know about the threats. We see climate change, understand the danger of nuclear weapons. We're beginning to realize AI risks. Information is available, discussed, researched. Our disadvantages: knowledge doesn't equal action. We've known about problems for decades, but structural factors, economics, politics, human nature, obstruct solutions. Corporations maximize short-term profit. Politicians think about the next election. People are preoccupied with daily problems. Nobody wants to sacrifice today for abstract benefit tomorrow. And time is running out. Climate models show we have 2 to 3 decades to radically cut emissions, or changes will become irreversible. The Arctic is melting faster than forecasts. Oceans are warming and acidifying. Extreme weather events are increasing. Nuclear arsenals are being modernized. Tensions between powers are rising. Arms control treaties are crumbling. The probability of accidental or intentional war isn't decreasing. AI is developing exponentially. Companies and states race for supremacy, ignoring safety warnings. We may create AGI within the next 10 to 20 years without any idea how to make it safe. We're on the same trajectory as the supposed previous civilizations. Rapid technological development without corresponding growth in wisdom and institutions to manage them. But there's one thing we have that they perhaps didn't: global connectivity. For the first time in human history, humanity is truly a global species. The internet connects billions of people instantly. Ideas spread at the speed of light. Collective consciousness forms in real time. This gives us a chance for global coordination, for collective action at a level impossible before. If enough people realize the threat, if enough people demand change, systems can change. Slowly, with resistance, but possibly. History shows humanity is capable of incredible collective efforts when it sees existential threat. We defeated Nazism, landed on the moon, eradicated smallpox. We can overcome the Great Filter if we choose to. But what if we're not alone in this struggle? What if someone is watching, waiting, evaluating? The UFO phenomenon, unidentified flying objects, or as they're now officially called, UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, has long been the territory of conspiracy theorists and fringe enthusiasts. But in recent years, the situation has changed radically. In 2017, the U.S. Department of Defense declassified videos filmed by fighter pilots showing objects performing maneuvers impossible for known technologies. Acceleration without visible engines, speeds exceeding hypersonic, instantaneous direction changes that would create G-forces destroying any material. Objects were observed visually, tracked by radar, infrared cameras. Multiple independent systems confirmed. These aren't technical glitches, not optical illusions. In 2021, the Pentagon published an official report acknowledging there exist objects demonstrating characteristics surpassing any known technologies. Their origin is unknown. The U.S. Congress held hearings. Military pilots testified under oath. They regularly encounter these objects, especially near military bases and ships with nuclear weapons. Moreover, there are documented cases where UFOs interfered with nuclear weapon operations. 1967. Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. Guards observed a glowing object hovering over the base. Simultaneously, all 10 intercontinental ballistic missiles on base went offline. Systems showed no-go without technical cause. Hours after the object departed, missiles functioned again. Similar cases recorded at several American and British bases. Objects appear, weapons deactivate. Objects vanish, weapons restore. This isn't an attack. This is demonstration. We can disable your most protected weapons. We're watching. Who are they? Options: secret military programs. But whose? If it's American technology, why does it appear near American bases, creating security risks? If Chinese or Russian, how did they bypass all air defense systems? And why not use such superiority openly? Extraterrestrial intelligence. Classic UFO explanation. But if so, why are they here? Why not make open contact? Representatives of an ancient Earth civilization that never completely disappeared. A small group possessing advanced technologies, living hidden, possibly underwater, underground, in remote regions, periodically appearing. Or something entirely different. Interdimensional beings, observers from parallel realities, time travelers, artificial intelligence created by a previous civilization, continuing to execute its programs. We don't know. But the pattern of their behavior is interesting. They observe, sometimes intervene minimally, avoid direct contact, but show their presence. Like examiners watching, checking, evaluating. Are we ready for something? The zoo hypothesis, proposed in 1973 by astronomer John Ball. Advanced civilizations intentionally avoid contact with less developed ones, allowing them to develop naturally as we maintain reserves for wild animals. This explains Fermi's paradox. They exist but hide, observing a galactic non-interference protocol. But if Earth is a reserve or laboratory, a question arises. What happens when we reach a certain level? When we begin leaving the planet, creating colonies, spreading into space? Will we be accepted into galactic community or isolated if we show ourselves too dangerous? Or perhaps the test isn't in technologies, but in our ability to overcome self-destructive tendencies. Can we handle nuclear weapons without destroying ourselves? Can we balance development and ecology? Can we create safe AI? If yes, welcome. If not, another failed civilization. And the galaxy continues waiting for the next attempt. Let's return to Earth and more concrete evidence of possible previous civilizations. One of the most intriguing anomalies: maps. In 1513, Turkish Admiral Piri Reis compiled a world map using, by his account, more ancient sources. The map shows the coastline of South America, Africa, and shockingly, the coastline of Antarctica, free of ice. Antarctica was officially discovered only in 1820. Its coastline is completely covered by ice shelves kilometers thick. But Piri Reis's map shows details of the coastline: mountains, rivers, everything now under ice. Geological research shows Antarctica's coastline was last ice-free approximately 6,000 years ago, some regions possibly over 10,000 years ago. How can a map from 1513 show information unavailable for the last several millennia? Piri wrote on the map that he used about 20 sources, some dating to Alexander the Great's time or earlier. Skeptics say, the map is inaccurate, coincidences are random, interpretations stretched. But there are other maps. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 shows Antarctica in the center with rivers, mountains, free of ice. Mercator's map of 1569 shows the continent divided by a strait into two masses, exactly as Antarctica looks beneath the ice, confirmed only by seismic research in the 20th century. Philippe Bouachet's map of 1737 shows Antarctica without ice, with accurate contours of sub-ice relief, which was mapped only in the 1950s using echolocation. All these maps claim to be based on more ancient sources. Who mapped Antarctica thousands of years ago when it was ice-free? Professor Charles Hapgood, who studied these maps in the 1960s, concluded, they're based on aerial photography or observations from great height. Map projections use spherical trigonometry, mathematics officially unknown in antiquity. This suggests existence of a civilization with advanced mathematics, navigation, and possibly aircraft, existing before Antarctica's glaciation. Where is this civilization? Perhaps it was based in regions now underwater or under ice. When climate changed, it vanished, leaving only maps, copied and recopied through millennia, gradually distorted, but preserving the core of true information. Another anomaly: the Richat structure in Mauritania. Visible from space, a concentric circular formation about 50 kilometers in diameter in the Sahara Desert. Perfect rings, like a giant target or waves frozen in stone. Official explanation: geological structure, result of erosion of dome-shaped rock uplift. But the form is too regular. Concentric rings, symmetry, location, all reminiscent of Plato's description of Atlantis. Plato described Atlantis as a city with concentric rings of land and water, the outer ring's diameter about 23 kilometers. Rishat is larger, but the pattern is similar. The Sahara wasn't always desert. 10,000 years ago, the region was fertile, with rivers, lakes, possibly even sea bays. Climate was humid, vegetation abundant. What if Rishat is remains of an ancient city built by water, abandoned when climate changed, now lying in desert, slowly erased by winds? Research showed finds of stone tools, signs of ancient habitation in the region, but systematic excavations haven't been conducted. Too remote, too expensive, too speculative. But what if Plato didn't invent Atlantis? What if he recorded a real story, distorted by time and retellings, but based on memory of a real place? Not a continent that sank in one night, but a city or civilization destroyed by climate changes, sea level rise, desertification over centuries or millennia, but memory of which compressed into legend of sudden catastrophe. Göbekli Tepe, 1994, southeastern Turkey. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt begins excavating a hill locals considered an old cemetery. He discovers a megalithic complex, circles of enormous T-shaped stone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, decorated with detailed carved animal images. Radiocarbon analysis dates the complex to approximately 9600 BCE, about 11,600 years ago. This is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, 7,000 years older than Egypt's pyramids, older than Sumer, Babylon, all known civilizations. And here's what makes this truly strange. Göbekli Tepe was built by hunter-gatherers. Officially, agriculture didn't exist then, no domesticated animals, no permanent settlements. But constructing such a complex requires organization, planning, mobilizing hundreds of workers over years or decades, requires feeding these workers, providing tools, coordinating efforts. How could hunter-gatherers living in small, mobile groups accomplish this? Moreover, after completion, the complex was intentionally buried. Someone expended enormous effort to bury it under tons of earth. Why build something grandiose, then bury it? Klaus Schmidt suggested. Göbekli Tepe was a ritual center, pilgrimage site for multiple hunter-gatherer groups. The need for regular gatherings may have stimulated agriculture development to feed pilgrims. But this inverts traditional understanding. Not agriculture leading to civilization, but religion or social organization leading to agriculture. Alternative interpretation. Göbekli Tepe wasn't first. It was the last, or one of the last projects of a fading civilization. Perhaps advanced culture existed before the Younger Dryas catastrophe. When comet impact destroyed their world, survivors rolled back to primitive existence. But memory of greatness remained. They built Göbekli Tepe as memory, as temple, as attempt to recreate something from the lost world, using last remnants of knowledge and organization. Then, when resources depleted or groups scattered, the complex was intentionally buried, possibly as a sacred place needing preservation, possibly to protect from desecration. This interpretation explains the complex's sophistication, its sudden appearance in archaeological record, and subsequent disappearance of megalithic construction for thousands of years until civilizations again became sufficiently developed. Göbekli Tepe may not be civilization's beginning, but its end. The last breath. Underwater structures off Cuba's coast, discovered in 2001 at 700 meters depth. Sonar scanning showed geometric forms, pyramids, rectangular structures, what looks like streets. To be at such depth, structures must have been built when sea level was 700 meters lower. This was possible only during glacial maximums, the last ending 20,000 years ago. Official science rejects the find. Too deep, too old, probably natural formations. Planned further research was canceled. The pattern repeats: discovery, brief interest, disputes, oblivion. Because consequences are too serious. If even one of these structures is genuinely artificial and truly tens of thousands of years old, all human civilization history rewrites. Academic careers built on existing paradigm, institutions, textbooks, reputations, all depend on accepted chronology. Radical revision means chaos, admitting errors, losing authority. Easier to reject than investigate. But truth doesn't depend on consensus. It exists independently of whether we recognize it. And facts accumulate. Each artifact, each anomaly, each ancient map, each underwater structure, a puzzle piece. Individually, each piece can be explained, rejected, ignored. But when you assemble them together, an image appears. Blurred, incomplete, but recognizable. An image of a world where civilizations arose and vanished long before us. Where intelligent life experimented, built, created technologies, then fell from catastrophes, wars, ecological collapses, self-destruction. We're not first. Possibly not last. We're another attempt, another experiment by the biosphere in creating a species capable of overcoming the great filter. So what do? If we accept the hypothesis that previous civilizations existed and fell, what lessons can we learn? First, sustainability matters more than growth. Infinite economic growth on a finite planet is mathematically impossible. At some point, we'll reach limits. The question is whether we reach them consciously, slowing and stabilizing, or unconsciously, hitting the wall and collapsing. Second, global cooperation is necessary. Threats we face, climate, nuclear weapons, pandemics, AI, are global by nature. No single country can solve them alone, but global cooperation requires overcoming nationalism, competition, distrust. Third, wisdom must keep pace with power. Technologies give us incredible power over nature, but don't give wisdom to use that power responsibly. We created nuclear weapons in a few years. Creating institutions and cultural norms to manage them took decades, and they're still fragile. Fourth, diversity and decentralization increase resilience. All eggs in one basket is a recipe for catastrophe. If all human civilization is on one planet, one planetary event, asteroid, supervolcano, nuclear winter, can destroy everything. Colonizing other planets, creating self-sufficient settlements on the Moon, Mars, space stations, this isn't just ambition, it's survival insurance. Fifth, memory must be preserved. If civilization falls, knowledge is lost. Survivors return to primitiveness, requiring millennia to recover. But what if knowledge were preserved? Archives protected from time, catastrophes, containing scientific, technical, cultural knowledge accessible to future generations. Perhaps previous civilizations tried leaving messages. Perhaps megaliths, strange artifacts, patterns in DNA are their attempts to transmit knowledge through time. But we can't read because they didn't know our language, and we don't know theirs. Right now, beneath your feet, under layers of rock, sedimentary deposits, and time, may lie remains of those who came before us. Their cities, technologies, dreams, all turned to dust, to strange minerals, to isotopic anomalies we can barely recognize. They looked at the same stars, asked the same questions, faced the same choices, and they made their choice. Now, it's our turn. Perhaps somewhere in vast space exists a library, an archive of all civilizations that ever arose in the galaxy. Each entry in an enormous database managed by beings or machines so ancient their origin is lost in time. In this archive is a section for failed civilizations, those who didn't pass the test. Their stories are short: emergence, growth, technological explosion, self-destruction. The pattern repeats with numbing consistency. Earth may already have several entries in that section, civilizations we don't even suspect. Each thought itself special, unique, first. Each believed it would succeed where probability mathematics said otherwise, and each fell. But there's another section in this library, smaller, much smaller, The section for those who succeeded. Civilizations that understood danger in time, overcame their evolutionary nature, learned to think in scales of millennia rather than quarters, created stable, sustainable societies capable of lasting millions of years. Which section will humanity enter? The record isn't closed. Our story is still being written. The ending isn't determined. But the critical moment is near. Choose wisely. Every day, every decision. Because you're not just an individual living your life. You're part of an experiment lasting billions of years. An experiment in creating intelligent life capable of understanding the universe and its place within it. Previous attempts failed, possibly many times. But the experiment continues. Life is persistent. It doesn't give up. And now, it's our turn to show we've learned. That we can be better than those who came before us. That humanity isn't another failed attempt but a success. A breakthrough. The next layer in the geological record is yours. Let it tell a story of triumph, not tragedy. Good night.